Hello everyone. We'll be continuing about the factors that will be affecting the choice of mode of transportation. Right. So we talked about a number of factors ranging from your cost, ranging from your shipping time or the transit time and the extra charges indulged into the same. Right. So we'll be talking about other factors also which decide upon that how you decide upon the which mode of transportation is to be opted from. So we also take into account how much what is the frequency of your transportation, because what happens out in case of your liner shipping, in case of your charter shipping, we talked about this frequency that is of utmost significance. We'll be talking about liner and the charter in the coming segments, but as of now your frequency of the transportation, onto what time, onto what lines it will be running upon, that also decides the mode of your transportation and how much reliable the mode of transportation is it, right? How much accessible it is. When we are talking about that we want to use the shipping as a mode of transportation, but what is the accessibility or accessibility of the same, and what is the availability of that mode of transportation. So all these factors, whether I talk about the frequency, whether I talk about the reliability, whether I talk about the availability, so all these factors also, they help derive you the composite score, because onto the basis of your cost, your speed, your capability, your dependability onto the mode of transportation, what sort the accessibility of the mode of transportation is frequency, you get a composite score, and accordingly you decide upon that which is the preferable mode of your transportation, right? Whether indulging the roadways is good, whether indulging the railways is good, or if let's suppose the articles are such or the goods are such which are slurry into nature, which are liquid into nature, or which are gaseous into nature, so we'll be going for pipelines, right? So we have different types of transportation. Since we talked about the modes, already we talked about the factors which help us determine the mode of your transportation. So we decide upon what is the type of transportation. It is the railways, it is the ocean, right? That is the shipping that we are talking about, the roadways, airways and pipelines. Now talking about each and every segment one by one in detail. Railways, it is the largest network into the world, right? And it is one of the cheapest network also when it comes to sending the bulkier cargo, when it comes to sending the heavier cargo. So railways, and soon after the containerization, railway through its channel having this Concorde, it is able to deliver to different parts of the world, right? So railway itself is very effective mode of transportation, being the oldest one, being the strongest one, and it is domestically so we mostly rely on to railways only. So let's say 90% of our goods, the movement took place through railways only. And when we talk about ocean transportation, there are again number of different shipping companies who are dominating this particular mode of your transportation, because there are different shipping lines, right? And then when we talk about the ocean transportation, we know if the longer the distance, the amount of your expenses, the cost would taper down. And similarly, if heavier or bulkier the products or the articles are, it is always advisable to go for the ocean mode of transportation, right? Similarly, when roadways, we usually are taken up as a connectivity mode between your, let's say, the railways, or connecting it to the ocean mode of transportation or airways, because roads again that road connectivity to different parts of the world is not possible in certain scenarios, right, because of the geographical foundations. So roadways are much popular if I talk about with specific respect to India and neighboring nations. So yeah, roadways is still effective, right? And similarly, airways, when we are talking about speedy delivery, when we are talking about the articles as such, they are to be delivered well in time. Because when we are talking about, airways mode, we usually prefer it for the cargo which is lighter in nature, which are of utmost urgence to be, to be delivered well in time. For example, your newspapers, right? Similarly, pipelines which indulges a heavy fixed cost and a lower variable cost, because all these gases, all these your liquid, all slurry sort of your cargo, it travels through the pipelines, and it takes a lot of cost to set up these pipelines. So that is why it is having a heavy fixed cost. And comparatively, if we talk about the variable cost later on, the variable cost for the pipelines is much less, right? So there are different parameters onto which you can decide upon that whether you want to go for the railways or the ocean route or the roadways or the air or the pipelines. It depends again the factors that we discuss upon. It depends on to your costing, it depends on to your distance, it depends on to your, you could see the time it is taking, the transit time. It depends on to the type of cargo, it depends on to the nation specific regulations, it depends on to what all are there into the agreements or into the incoterms with the importer, how much strong bargaining power importer is having. So accordingly you decide upon which type of transportation is to be taken up, right? Now, since we talked about transport, we talked about the types of different transports, and we talked about your, you could say, different mode factors determining the mode of transportation. Another point is that the different types of your transport carriers. There being the common carrier, there being the contract carriers, private carriers, and exempt carriers. Now, one by one, we'll be talking about these, each categories. So, common carriers, as we discussed upon, which are, commonly available, those carriers which are, you pay a amount and they run on to the routes which are commonly available for the public, all those carriers, whether we talk about the railways, similarly for the roadways, for the airways, for the shipping, right? Therein you are not having a personal engagement with the carrier company, so it is easily available for the public out there, for the general public out there. You pay whatever the charges corresponding to the same, and you can access the services of the same. Whereas your contract carriers, for example, any company, let's say thermal plant in India, it wants to take the coal from, let's say, Australia or South Africa. So it is having a contract with a carrier for to haul the goods. Let's suppose with the shipping company to haul the goods from South Africa or Australia to India. In this particular case, I was giving a reference of coal, right? So contract carriers, they run onto specific lines, right? By the specific, it's a sort of your arrangement. It is a contracted arrangement between the company and the person who is taking the services. So they run on to the predetermined lines, onto the predetermined fares, right, onto the pre-scheduled frequency lines, right? For example, in days per it will run, what will be its price, onto what routes will it go. So that is pre-decided. So that is a contract for a specific thing. जैसे मैंने thermal plant का कहा, that thermal plant requires the coal and it is to be brought from Australia or South Africa. So this contract carrier will be what? It will be it will be a specific contract between the company and the thermal plant, wherein that shipping line will be bringing the coal from the Australia or Africa to India for the thermal plant. Whereas your private carriers are, for example, SR shipping. It's having its own private line that is not rented out to someone else. In case of contract carriers is what? Either, for let's say today A is getting into a contract with the shipping company, tomorrow B can get into a contract with the shipping company, or C or D or up to Z, right? Whosoever with a person can have a contract with respect to the specific, you could say the, lines to the routes at the predetermined rates. But when we are talking about the private carrier, it is a private arrangement of a company. It is exclusively being there providing the services for that specific company. No other person B, C, D, E or whosoever can take the services of the same. It is there for the private consumption, for the private usage of a particular company. Whereas when I talk about exempt carriers, so you have seen all these these hawkers, right, which used to sell the fruits and vegetables onto those, rickshaw pullers, onto some, some other tractors or trolleys. So these are what? These are your exempt carriers, wherein no economic regulations are mandated onto them. All these, trucks and trolleys coming from Punjab and Haryana for delivering their produce to the markets out there in Delhi and other parts of India, these are your exempted carriers, where onto no such, economic regulations are bounded onto the same. So that is why I was giving you an example of your hawkers, wherein, into Delhi you would see they are carrying their carts and onto the same they are selling their vegetables or fruits. So these are the exempted carriers. Similarly your tractors, similarly your trolleys. So these all come under the purview of your exempted carriers, right? Now, next point is that, when we are talking about these type of your transport companies or transport carriers, or the when we are talking about the mode of transportation, what mode of transportation is to be taken care of, we have two concepts: intermodal transportation or multimodal transportation. Multimodal, as you know, Gati Shakti Yojana, the government is also, much vouching for the same. So what it is about, wherein you can indulge different modes of your transportation, right? And you have this option whether you want to run under a single contract, or you want to go opting for this option wherein, you are having the same thing, that you can indulge different models of your modes of your transportation, but then there would not be single binding contract. But in case of your multimodal transportation, what happens out is, for example, you have to go from A to a point B, right? And there are certain, stoppages. So from A to B, you take a let's say roadways. Then B to C, you go via railways. Then B to C to this D point, again you again take that roadways route. So this is a multimodal transportation, but it is run under a single contract. That means there is only one contract binding the same. That means you go to this agency EBC Limited and you ask for that these goods are to be sent from this point of origin to this point of destination. Then your role is done. Now it comes the role of your that agency, which is a freight forwarder. It will do what is, it will indulge according to the, depending upon different factors, the cost, the time, and the sort of your product, it will indulge different your modes of transportation so that the timely delivery is being done, right? So when it is run under one single contract, it is known as your multimodal transportation. We'll be talking about this multimodal transportation in details. In the coming segments, we'll be talking about, we are in the full-fledged segment onto ocean transportation, multimodal, intermodal, and role of your ICDs on different aspects pertaining to the same. So as of now, I'll come back to this thing wherein we were talking about the modes of transportation. Another factor, as I earlier talked about the unitization or palletization. Now, why does it matters a lot? As you could see it onto the screen, there is a photograph which is, a ULD, that is a unit load device, wherein, all your goods are placed on a skid, sort of a skid, it's a pallet, right? So onto these wooden pallets, your goods are being placed, they are unitized, then shrink wrapped with a, with a sort of your bubble wrap to cushion the same to protect it from any biological or environmental hazards, right? Now, you could, decipher it from this particular picture that this is what? This is first the goods are consolidated together, right? They are tied up, right? Using that bubble sheet wrap, which is your unitization, wherein all those small units, they are placed on, they are consolidated together using, and then they are, tied up together, then this shrink wrapping is being done using the bubble sheets, which also is known as your dunnage. So this is your unitization, which does what? Which does the consolidation of the articles. Now, through this consolidation, what happens out is that it saves your space. It rather provides you proper storage into the vessel. So when we talk about storage, it means when you are talking about fully utilizing the space which is there onto the shipping vessel, right? So that is your storage. So if there will be unitization of the articles, there will be proper storage, you will be having a better shipping space, your goods will be consolidated, and then you place it up onto those wooden pallets, right? Now these wooden pallets, it is having a long history. It has been evolved from the time of World War I, when earlier there used to be skids. Then over the time period, these wooden skids, they were used to be big, wooden skids onto which your articles were being placed. All those, ammunitions, all those weapon, things that were required, or the fooding arrangements. So they used to be carried up onto these skids only. So over the time it has been evolved, wherein nowadays you will see the plastic pallets also, you will see the wooden pallets also, right? So now what my point out here is that, because we'll be talking about the different again, factors with respect to palletization, wherein certain countries they have, imposed the restriction, wherein it talks about that when you are using the wooden pallets, fumigation of the same is to be done. That means maybe those wooden pallets could be infested with the honey beetles. Now what are those honey beetles? Honey beetles is again, a sort of a termite which can cause any sort of infection, any sort of your, the problem to the wood that is being used for the, making those pallets. So that is why countries like New Zealand, they ask for the you could say ISPM 15 guidelines to be, followed up, which requires that fumigation of these pallets should be done, right? And these pallets, these are nothing but the wooden blocks, and they are, prepared in such an means, or through such a method through which it becomes very easy to load and unload the cargo. So use the hydraulic lifts, you use the forklifts, because they are vertical cleats onto the sidelines of these, when it is like, see, it is like this thing, you are having a pallet, and onto the same those goods are being placed. Now it is, attached with the vertical cleats, and then those vertical cleats are helpful in, forklifting or using the hydraulic lifts, you can easily load and unload the same. So it provides, super easy for you to just load and unload the cargo, and plus it sort of provides the security of the cargo also. Through your unitization, the goods are consolidated, you are better able to use the shipping space, right? So all these, we are talking about things that how your pallets have, and especially after your containerization, because it has been evolved since the time period of your World War I, right? And which used to be in the form of your skids, and then it used to be a lift truck platform, and then it was a stringer with a forklift and so on. So these designing of pallets have been evolved over the period of time, and it is into much practice after this concept of your containerization, wherein pallets are being used, and there are certain dimensions for the same also, wherein it specifies the guidelines that what are the standard you could say dimensions or the descriptions of the same. So you could just see onto your screens, wherein you will just have glimpse about the standardization of the pallets, the different dimensions which is given into the inches, and then you could see that if you will be using these much dimensions of a pallet, then what will be the unutilized floor space in a 40-inch of equivalent unit ISO container. So if we'll be using a dimension of 31.5 by 47.34, so you will be having a unused floor space of as large as 15.2%, and mostly it is your 40 by 48 inches, which is much prevalent into North America and the other parts of the world, where in your different sizes of your pallets are being used. And you could see if you are using this 40 by 48 wala dimension, so your unutilized floor space is the least, right? So we will obviously be utilizing such pallets wherein that unutilized space is less, and more of the space into the container you are able to absorb, right? So the rates for the pallets, it depends on to its sizes, into the areas it is operating, but these are the standardized guidelines with respect to your pallets that are to be taken care of, because when we are talking about international shipping, so it has to be a standardization. It has to come up with a uniform size, right? It cannot be like every country is making its own standard sizes. It is like uniform unification of your different dimension. That means you are having a standardization with respect to the dimensions of the pallets that are to be used in the containers, right? So this standardization of pallets are being done so as to provide the ease, super ease, and you be into any part of the world, you will be getting to choose from these dimensions only, and it will be very easier if you will be using the pallets, because there is a runner place in between wherein you can just place your these forklifters to using these vertical cleats, they can easily be lifted up. So that provides super ease in handling and loading and unloading of the cargo. So as I said that this palletization can be you can place the loose items and shrink wrap the same, and either the crated cargoes could be used onto the same. So that depends on to the types of your articles. So different ways of your palletization being there. And when we are talking about your this concept of your pallets, these are very widely applicable, these are widely being used, right? And the purpose is that it sort of provides you a ease, whether we talk about unitization or palletization, and it makes it very easier also to handle the same and to effectively utilize the space, the storage space onto the ship, or for that sake when you are placing it up onto the aircraft, you place it up as shown to you earlier via image, wherein when you are placing it up over a pallet, then making it as a unit load device through which it is very easier to handle the same. So when we are serving the international markets, all these factors which we talked upon, whether it is the mode of transportation, whether the factors determining the mode of transportation, the role of your concept of unitization, palletization, all these things matters a lot when you are serving the international market. Because if you are serving the international markets, you have to match the international requirements. you have to give a tough competition wherein it doesn't become that much easy to eliminate you, right? Whether you should have that competitive advantage, whether you should have that USP that you are, easily and in a better manner able to serve the larger markets. So that ways, all these things should be taken care of when you are serving the international markets. What sort of your mode of transportation is to be used. It is the railways, roadways, or pipelines for that sake, because even when we are talking about pipelines, it indulges heavy fixed costs and comparatively lower variable costs. So pipelines are much cheaper, right? And but the thing is that only the liquid, the slurry sort of your articles can be, fluid sort of articles can be transported using these pipelines. And when it comes to ocean, obviously there stands along with the advantages different disadvantages. For example, when we are talking about ocean, so there could be risk of your pilferage, there could be risk of your theft, and there could be number of associated risk with the same. And accordingly you have to take care whether the container is a LCL1 or it is a HCL1, that it is having the load which is less than the cargo load, or it is having the load which is fullest to the cargo load capacity, container load capacity. So accordingly you have to make the choices. You have to see for what all are the economic, political and social conditions are there. So all these things are to be taken care of when you are serving the international markets, right? And further on, when for example I talked about this concept of wooden pallets. So when we are talking about wooden pallets, I mentioned that certain countries, they mention about the mandated, one has to follow the guidelines provided by the ISPM 15, which talks about that the wood that are used for making the pallets, they should not be infested with any sort of your insects, any sort of your bacteria, or horny beetle is one such kind it could be infested with. So it says that fumigation should be done, and you can just go to nearby ICD centers, you can go to, if any ports are there nearby to your area, and just see how this process actually goes up, like, right, how these containers are being placed, how this this thing of palletization is being done or unitization being done, how this fumigation is being done, so that you can have a real insight about the things, about how they are being sent from one point to another point, and what all documentations are being required into this entire journey to haul the goods from one place to another point. So that ways you, if you got any chance to just visit to, please do visit to such ICD centers, to visit to these ports and just see how the mechanism goes like, right? Now when we are talking about the packing also matters a lot, because it depends on to country, there are different requirements in different countries with respect to packing aspect also, which we already discussed into the last segment, that how does a color in a packing, how does the labeling into the packing, it matters a lot. Or so all these things are to be very carefully taken up when we are deciding upon that which mode of transportation is to be decided for sending the goods out from one point to another point. So that's it for the day, and we'll be talking about the ocean transportation much more in detail, the containerization much more in detail in the coming segments. So thank you.